And there we go. Okay. I'd just like to do a quick introduction to all of our medical librarians who are here tonight. I will start with the bio for Boglarka Huddleston. You are the manager of research and instruction at Lane Medical Library at Stanford School of Medicine. Your main duties include day-to-day operations of research and instruction unit. You're the Lane liaison, or the Lane liaison program and research and data literature support services. And before you started at Stanford, you were at the Health Sciences and Assessment Librarian at Texas Christian University for a decade. And you have experience working in public libraries. And I won't say too much more. That's just an overview. And Amanda Woodward is also from Stanford's Lane Library. You are the web services librarian, and you manage the library website. You oversee the marketing team, and you participate in research and instruction activities. And prior to working at Stanford, Amanda was the nurse liaison librarian at Duke University Medical Center Library. And you've also worked as a librarian at Woodbury University and Disney Consumer Products. And we have Eileen Chen from who is an education and clinical research librarian at the University of California, San Francisco. You have a bachelor's in English literature, and you graduated with your MLIS from the University of British Columbia in 2022. And you transitioned into medical librarianship after 3 years at the public library. And you've worked in both academic and hospital libraries. So that's the overview. And what I thought we would do is ask one question of all of you, and you can take turns answering the question. How does that sound? Okay. How did you get started in your role, your current role? And whoever wants to go first can go.
I'll go first. So this is my first management level job in my career, and I came from, I relocated from Texas about 15 months ago for this very particular job, and I do not have any formal management background or training, and apparently I interviewed well enough that they gave me this opportunity. And now I can use my team as the first team I'm actually managing. I have about to have 4 full-time team members and 2 part-time team members on my team. And then because my background was in the health sciences, just becoming a medical librarian was kind of a natural next step for me. That transition was pretty natural. The management piece was new, that was added for me last year.
Okay, great.
I can go next.
Okay.
I got into medical librarianship kind of by accident when I moved to North Carolina. I was moving there from LA area because my husband was going to graduate school and looking for any type of academic librarian role, and met someone that worked at the Duke Medical Library, and they had a grant position available that was just a part-time librarian to help with some reference and instruction work, and then also some work related to a grant. And so I started working there because of that role. And then while I was there, the nursing liaison librarian decided to leave. And so it was my good fortune to then step into her role and be able to kind of become a full-fledged medical librarian. And then when I moved back to California, I was looking for roles in medical librarianship because I really liked the environment of working at an academic medical center, and found the web services role at Stanford.
Great. And Eileen?
So for me, I guess right after I finished my bachelor's in English, I got into translation and interpreting because Mandarin is my first language, and I mostly ended up working in medical contexts, and I realized that I really liked it. Ultimately, translation wasn't really a sustainable career for me for a variety of reasons related to pay and also for the role of AIs. Um, but anyway, I decided to go into library school, and I always had medical librarianship sort of on the back of my mind while I was in library school. And eventually, while I was working at a public library, I started applying all over the place and ended up here.
Wow, great. All right, thank you all. The next question is, how did your MLIS experience prepare you for your jobs?
I can go first with the,
Great.
well, so this is a class, correct? Like the audience is.
Well, we're all of us who are here tonight are currently in the MLIS program at San Jose State University. So
All right.
we're taking classes currently.
Okay, as that changes my answer a little bit. But truthfully, the day-to-day, what I'm doing, the reference services, the systematic reviews, the teaching, when I was when I was working on my MLIS, it didn't really prepare for me a whole lot. What it prepared, the coursework prepared a lot more, it focused more on technical services and the background of librarianship, but not necessarily the day-to-day. And when I got my first job in an academic library, that was like when I was fresh out of graduate school, basically I learned most everything I know today from my peers and starting to work in an actual academic library. I mean, you know, I learned what a reference transaction is, and I learned the basics and the definitions of it, but that's about it, to be honest. But that was my experience, and again, that was over 15 years ago. So, so probably the curriculum has changed since.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can kind of relate to that as well. I think that a lot of the learning that I've done has been on the job, but I will say that when I was earning my degree, it did give me a really good foundation in terms of just how information systems are built and like the theory of things. And I don't do any cataloging, but it like exposed me to that world and how cataloging works. And I think it gave me that good like bird's eye view of the library world, which like when you're in a job you don't necessarily have, depending on the size of your library and how much you interact with people in different departments.
All right, thank you.
I would echo what has been said about the MLIS curriculum. I feel like it was nice learning some theory-based stuff like how to think about framing a reference interaction and things like that. And I guess I did also learn very basic Boolean in my library program, but I feel like I could probably have gotten by without it. And what was most valuable from the program was probably that it put me in the position to think of my own projects, and because I already knew that I was interested in medical libraries, I tried to focus most of my projects on related topics. So like in the metadata class that I took, I decided to look more deeply into mesh terms. So that's what's used for PubMed and Medline searching. And I ended up doing a pilot study on comparing human indexing with automated indexing, which is being done by the NLM right now. And I won't go into the boring technical details, but yeah, it was through that project that I learned so much more about database searching and got to collaborate with a few cool people. And that really enriched my experience. Yeah, and also the WorkLearn program that we had. I don't know if you have something similar at SJSU where you it's sort of like a co-op, sort of like an internship, but you get paid for it. Yeah, so we had that with UBC. So I did get to work as a work learning student at UBC for 10 hours a week at a health sciences library, or like with STEM combined. So that was also very helpful to me.
That's great. Thank you. All right. Well, the next question is, what was the application process like for your job? Is there anything specific that you can speak to about that process?
I can go first. I think the very first, when I was fresh out of, and I know you asked about my current job, but just kind of going back a little bit, when I was applying for my first librarian position at a university, I did not expect the process to be so prolonged. Like I was in a different profession previously, and my standard, okay, I applied, they called me in for an interview, and then a week later they called me whether I got the job or not. So that was my previous experience. With academia, it's months and months and months. So I was not prepared for that in the very beginning. I didn't know that's how long it's going to be. So to kind of bring it back to my current position, it was months and months. I applied X years ago in December, and I actually started working the following June, because just like the process and the time that passes between interviews, with interview with HR, interview with the Zoom interview with the search committee, in-person on-campus interview, weeks and weeks go by between these. And I think that's something that no one told me about before, when I was first applying. So I think that's important to know, that if you are planning to go into academia, the process is months at a time. And I am actually in the process right now of hiring somebody for my own team. And that's been several months at the moment. We finally found somebody, and the person is starting next month, but it's been an ongoing process.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I also, besides it taking so long, I was also very surprised with academic roles about just like the intensity of the interview process. Because my first job in a library after graduate school was in a corporate library, and that was more of your like traditional interview process where like you apply, they call you in a week later for an interview. It's like an hour that you go home, then you find out if you got the role or not within a week. Where academic interviewing was like a totally new thing to me. And that's something I don't think I ever learned about when I was still a student, of having like these day-long interviews, which can feel like a lot of pressure, especially when you're traveling for them as well. And so it becomes like more than just a day. If you're traveling somewhere out of state, you have to like plan to have like a few days to like get to the interview, have a full day that's exhausting, and then travel back to home. So that was a new process, and also having like a presentation component to it was something that I didn't expect before I was interviewing for academic roles. And depending on the role, like sometimes that's a teaching example where you do kind of like a mock lesson, and sometimes it's more of like a theoretical presentation of how you would go about starting a new program, or responding to a certain trend in librarianship or something like that. So definitely a different interview process than I think a lot of people think about when they're thinking about more traditional roles.
That's great. Thank you.
Everything Amanda said, that day-long interview process, I hear in some places it might even be 2 days long. It really drains you. And so the position I'm in right now, it's actually a temp position. So the interview process wasn't quite as formal. They basically just scheduled a few Zoom calls, and I think I did 3 rounds of Zoom calls in total. Like the last one felt more informal. And then I got the job. But for the other job that I did also get a job offer for right before this one, they actually flew me down from Canada to the school, and was a very interesting process because when I got there, they also gave me a whole schedule of what to do the whole day. When I got there, they sat me in a room with a computer and told me, okay, so most of this interview is actually going to be done over Zoom because they had other campuses, and I guess the people on their committee are not all in the same place, so they flew me down for a Zoom interview. But it was nice getting to see the campus, and yeah, that one also had I had to do a presentation and write an outreach plan, so it was quite demanding. Oh, and one thing about what UCSF did for my interview and what some other places have been doing more and more as well is that they provided me with all the interview questions they were going to ask me. And I really appreciate that because I think as librarians, we aren't really like having to think on our toes. Like it isn't as big of a job requirement for us as it may be for some other professions. So I don't think we should be tested on our ability to think on the spot. And being given some of those questions in advance really helped me formulate more rounded answers that better represent me, I think.
That's
That's
great.
great that they did that. Yeah. And I will also add that like one of the things that I did to prep for those day-long interviews was like come up with stories ahead of time because like Eileen was saying, it's like really hard in the moment to think of those specific examples. And I think that's what people want to hear, or like exactly what you did in past internships and roles that you've worked in. And so I actually like wrote out, you know, a page of like 4 or 5 stories that then I could use, you know, they fit many questions of like teamwork questions or questions about conflict or whatever it might be. And that really helped me like be more at ease during the interview process to know I had those stories to go back to.
And this is so important what Amanda just said, because I did also a lot of preparation, and I thought of the possible questions that they may ask me, such as, you know, teamwork, what's my greatest accomplishment, or what's my motivation, what's my teaching philosophy, things like that. So I also had like pages of typed up how I would answer this. And even though I didn't know the questions in advance, I could have an intelligent guess that these are the kinds of questions they are going to ask me, and that is so helpful. And then to what Eileen said, not the current search committee that I was on, but another one in the library did the same thing. They provided the person with the questions they would ask in advance. So that was brand new to me, and I have not ever experienced that before, but apparently this is something that's now happening. And I'm glad Eileen said it too, because I wasn't sure if that's unique to, you know, what our team just did or our library just did, or if it's being done elsewhere.
That's great to know. Yeah, all of that's very helpful. Okay, so you've all spoke to this a little bit about what your experience was apart from your MLIS. So I don't know if we really need to go over that, but I guess the question speaks to, did you have internships or work study? And I think Eileen's and Amanda both covered that in some of the questions before. And I don't know if any of you have anything to add to that particular question. No.
I think I would just say like to take on a variety of experiences, like that has always served me well in my career, because you might have your heart set on one particular type of role, but depending on your other limitations, like if you have a geography limitation or things like that, like there might not be that perfect role for you. So I've tried to be flexible in my career in terms of like having interest in things related to like user experience and websites, undergrad, medical librarianship, like just kind of taking on all of those things because you don't know what's going to serve you best in the next role that you take on.
That's helpful.
And I did, when I was finishing up my degree, I did 2 internships. Both of them were unpaid. One was in a public library and one was in a medical library. And those were 2 very different experiences, which kind of led me down the academic experience for my career, because that was better suited for me. So just as Amanda just said, exposure to all kinds of different experiences, I think is very helpful.
That's great. Thank you. Okay. The next question is, what does a typical day for you look like? What is your typical day like? Who wants to start? Is that too broad of a question?
I think it's hard because there is not really like one typical day. But I think I'm a bit unique in that I work fully remotely. So I'm actually in Southern California. So my typical day isn't going to campus or anything like that. But I have a mix of work. So it's helping with different literature searches and meeting with different groups to talk about what they're trying to research and their systematic review projects. Sometimes it's teaching classes over Zoom on different topics like a library orientation or how to use a program like Zotero. And then I also do a lot of work with our web content. So writing blog posts and kind of managing all the blog posts that are going to go up on our website, rewriting and working with content owners for different information pages on our website, managing our LibGuides, all of our research guides, making sure people update those, and then working with our marketing team just to think about like what's going on our campus, what's going on in the library world, what do we want to promote this particular month, and creating all of the content for that.
Great.
As I can talk about my day. So I was hired to cover for initially 2 maternity leaves in the education and research department. So that's most of what I do, but we are definitely having a baby boom in the UCSF library right now. So our director of data sciences and open scholarship also went on mat leave. So now I'm also dabbling in data services and a little bit of scholarly communications. But the way I structure most of my days when I can afford to structure my days is that I open up my entire afternoon for consultations unless I have other meetings and stuff that come up. And the consultations are mostly literature reviews, like systematic review type searching based consultations. Very occasionally do I get questions about data management plans or about publishing. Most of those come in through email. And then I spend the morning responding to a lot of tickets. We have a whole ticketing system. We use Zendesk software. So I am the primary person responsible for fielding those tickets or like answering them if I'm able to. Yeah, and I structure my day this way because I have a horrible insomnia problem. So I try my best to keep all my meetings in the late morning or afternoons, just because I find that when I have something first thing in the morning, I give myself a lot of stress when I'm trying to go to sleep. I tell myself, you have to be up at 7:30 a.m. to prepare for this, and then that makes it even harder to fall asleep. So yeah, having that flexibility is something I really appreciate about my job, being able to make my own schedule.
Thank you.
I think that's one of the greatest things I've experienced in academic libraries I've worked in is the flexibility Eileen just mentioned. I don't really have a daily schedule. It varies from day to day, but I do have the flexibility to set my own schedule and schedule the appointments, schedule the classes, schedule reference work. And my position, because it also involves management, so it's 50% I'm doing librarian stuff and 50% I'm doing management stuff. So, but it's nice. It's really nice to have that flexibility. And kind of how Lane Library is set up, we don't have walk-in appointments. It is very rare that we see walk-in people. Most of our appointments are scheduled. We use LibCalendar for LibCal for people can schedule appointments with us. So it is very rare that we actually have to do any kind of, those of us who are there in person, that we have to do any kind of walk-in appointments. And also this is the first library I ever worked in, academic library, that we do not have any like desk duty per se. Previous academic libraries I worked in, there was always a reference desk, and then the reference librarians shared the responsibility of attending to the reference desk. At Lane, we do not have that. We do have an access services desk, but the liaison librarians do not cover it. So we can schedule our day basically however we want to and however it fits in with the big scheme of things.
Great.
Just
Thank
want to
you.
add that at UCSF, we also don't have drop-in hours. It's by booking only, and I think that is the way to go.
Yes.
Yeah, because when I was working as a student librarian at UBC, we did have drop-in hours, and I was the one who had to do it. And I found that I was just sitting there for 3 hours, just waiting for nobody to show up, and I couldn't really free up my time for any other project that demanded more of my attention. So I like how things are done here.
And in a medical library, I like that we don't have drop-in and we don't have a whole lot of walk-ins, because to be honest, we get a lot of really, really complicated medical reference questions that I need to prepare for. We get most of the questions we get, I can just answer on the fly. Yes, I can do a PubMed search and I can do an Embase search, but to actually do a really good reference interview and provide them with the resources and the articles that they need, I have to prepare for that. So when they schedule their appointments, they normally tell us what, the topic that they are interested in or what they are looking for exactly. So I actually get to prepare for that. So I don't have to sit there and guess and potentially fail, in a live reference interaction.
Well, that's helpful, actually, I think.
Yes.
It's a much better approach.
Yes.
Great. The last question is, do you have any tips for current MLIS students looking to get into medical librarianship?
I think the biggest tip would be to just try to get some sort of like internship or work experience in a medical environment, because that's where I learned the most of just like being able to help with projects and work with people who are medical librarians directly. They could also get involved with the Medical Library Association. They have local chapters that do programming, as well as the national organization that has a conference and has lots of webinars. So I think getting involved with that, of just seeing like what are the hot topics and what are people learning about. Everyone there has always been very warm and welcoming to me. So I think it's a smaller professional organization, which is kind of nice, because you start to see like the same names and the same faces as you become more involved. Versus really large organizations, like ALA or ACRL. So I think those are good options.
Great. Okay. Please go ahead.
And there were the thing that we mentioned earlier, just to get exposure to different kinds of, the different kinds of venues you can take with medical librarianship. I also think it's a very fast-paced, fast-moving environment, and it can be intimidating, especially because it's medicine and because you can just wing it. Like, this is serious, this is serious research, and people's lives may depend on it, like, in the big scheme of things. Mm-hmm. And that can be intimidating. So don't be intimidated. You're not expected to know everything the doctors do, but you know how to do the research for it, and capitalize on that, because I feel like our faculty and fellows and postdocs and students really appreciate our knowledge and our expertise, and I really like that they know that one thing they know and the other thing that we know, and they rely on that, and they come to us for help. So that's really nice. Just, don't be intimidated. It is intimidating, especially in the beginning, but you just kind of go with the flow and you get used to it.
Definitely agree about getting exposure to different experiences. And I guess I wanted to add a word about networking, because that's one advice that people often pass around. And when I was in library school, I thought about it. Like, what does it mean to me? Is that adding people on LinkedIn? Is that and I did join a few mentorship programs where they pair you one-on-one with another more experienced librarian. And I think that's a nice initiative, but it also didn't work for me like 100%, because I feel like maybe as a more introverted person and as somebody who hasn't had that much experience in the field, I'm not even sure what questions to begin asking. And I find that those relationships sort of ended up petering out a bit. And I think the most meaningful connections I made in the field have been people I formed more organic relationships with, that I worked on projects with, like the research paper I mentioned, or a working group or committee. So I think those were definitely very helpful to be in for me.
Thank you. We do have a question from one of our attendees. How much medical background do you need to have in order to be considered a strong candidate at an academic medical library? And how should we prepare for the interview? So
I don't, in my experience, like actual medical background is not a requirement for the job. It is helpful to have a secondary degree, like many other places I have worked at. In academia, they did require the secondary master's degree. And I have a degree in psychology, and I worked as a licensed professional counselor in my previous profession. So I have that background, and that has been helpful with my career. But I don't think that actual medical background is a requirement. It's good to know, it's good to have a general idea of systematic reviews and scoping reviews, and how to operate the medical databases and how to do in-depth searches. But all of those are librarianship and not necessarily medical stuff. So that's kind of the answer to that. And I think we kind of covered the how do you prepare for the interview, write out your scenarios, think about if you are applying in a medical library, think about your experiences. Even if you don't have medical type experiences, think about experiences that could translate to a situation that you would encounter in a medical library. Yes.
that does bring up a good question. Do all three of you have secondary master's degrees?
I don't.
Pretty much not. My background is in literature, so
Mine is as well, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I did not have any medical background, and actually like avoided a lot of science classes when I was in my undergrad, and was like very into like art history and literature. But a lot of it was on the job learning. And so like finding an environment where they're willing to have you come in as a newer librarian and teach you along the way is really helpful. But I think, if you are trying to prepare for an interview, it's less about the medical background and more like Bolarka was saying, of understanding like the tools that medical researchers use, like PubMed, and maybe reading a bit about evidence-based medicine and thinking about like how information literacy is framed within the medical field, is really helpful, just so you kind of have that sense of like the language that's used, but I don't think that you need to have a strong medical background.
Yeah. And I guess on the more optimistic side, a lot of people who do have secondary medical backgrounds wouldn't want to become librarians anyway. So I feel like the pool of people who actually have a medical background and want to become librarian isn't that big.
Right. I think what I meant was a secondary master's degree in something, because that has been traditionally what academic libraries want in their candidates is.
Yeah, I mean, they may say that on the job application, but the people who actually apply for it, maybe none of them do. So
I think it's sort of changing from what I understand, but it is, that's why I wanted to ask the question, just to find out from the three of you what your personal experience was.
I think it's been definitely changing, because when I started out, it was a requirement. That's how I ended up in the health sciences, because my secondary master's was in psychology. So health sciences was a natural place for me to be. But just looking at Lane Library, where both Amanda and I work at, like, we don't require a secondary degree. It's it's nice to have it. It's great, but it's not a requirement.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions? It looks like there was a question about that was answered in the chat by Eileen about those students who have been unable to get internships or experience while in library school, but she recommended volunteering at library conferences. And I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that, but
and also volunteering in a library. We have student workers, we have volunteers at Lane, so and we always welcome people to volunteer. And many times the volunteer positions in libraries are more like access services and front desk oriented, but you do encounter reference questions at an access services desk. And then you get to network with the liaison librarians or the reference librarians. You get to know them just by way of being in the same building with them and working around them. So that's a really good opportunity to learn from them. Sit in on an actual reference interview and get that kind of exposure. I think that's as good as having an internship.
That's helpful. Thank you. Let's see. Oh, lots of questions popping up. On a daily basis, would a medical librarian typically have a certain number of reviews or research, like a quota that they need to complete per day? Do you guys have those sort of metrics that you have to meet?
We do not. At Lane, we don't have any kind of quota, daily, weekly, or monthly that we have to meet. But we're also so incredibly busy all the time that whatever the quota would be, we're way past it. But we don't. I've never worked in a academic library where there was a quota.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let's see. Oh, I thought there was.
But as a question, I'm sorry.
You please go ahead if you're.
Oh, there was one. Have any of you worked on any really interesting research projects with your professors or other researchers?
I think they're all pretty interesting. Like, I always learn something new. But I think one of the things that I was unaware of before I started working in medical libraries was the opportunity to publish with a research group. Because when I was working at a more undergrad focused university, like, it was never something where I would become part of the research team. So I think that's something kind of cool about working as a medical librarian, that I have authorship on a lot of the reviews that I'm more involved in, because they really do value the contribution of developing a search strategy for a systematic review or a scoping review. And so those are great because you get to, like, kind of be, a member of the research team, learn about things that you might not have ever dived into on your own, but go really deep on developing those search strategies.
Another question, what challenges do you experience in the medical library field, or what challenges does the field in general face? Can any of you speak to that?
I think some of the challenges, just from my personal experience, is medicine is 24/7. Like, the doctors and the postdocs and the fellows and the students, the medical students, they are 24/7. I don't know when they sleep. I don't think they sleep, period, for like decades at a time. And you have to be you have to be diligent about your own mental health and your own work hours and setting boundaries. Just because a professor is emailing you at 2 o'clock in the morning because that's their natural awake time and work time, that's not yours. So I think that's it's a challenge to kind of draw those boundaries and establish them for yourself and then stick to them. But I think that kind of goes for every field, that you just have to set those boundaries. And because medicine just doesn't stop and they don't sleep.
Good to know. Are there different types of titles we would look for in a medical library? That's another question. I'm not really.
Like job titles, maybe?
Are you looking for job titles, Rosine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, job titles. Thank you.
I think job titles are kind of one of those things that always is like what the trend is currently, what people are looking for. But I mean, there's usually going to be like a reference or instruction related role, like that's a pretty typical one. And then there's, I think, buzzy things like we were just hiring for a research communications librarian. There's a lot of like data services librarians currently. So I think those are two like hot areas of like research impact and data in medical libraries. But there's all types of roles like you'll find across different academic libraries. Like if you want to work more in resource management, there's things like electronic resources librarian, metadata librarian, those type of things. So it really depends on if you want to be more public facing or more someone that is, back at the house doing cataloging and different metadata tasks.
Thank you.
And another question is, I'm making a career transition from public health to info sciences, so I'm finding it hard to break into even entry-level library jobs, much less medical library roles. Do you have any advice on how to navigate this transition, especially when it's from a health-related field?
So from my personal experience, because I also came from a different profession, and when I was going to library school, many people in my class were coming from different professions, and becoming a librarian was their second profession in life. You have to have faith and hope in the fact that somebody will give you a chance, to be honest. That's very important, that you have to believe in that. And a cover letter, like and somebody who is just now hiring people for my own team, have a solid cover letter. Explain your transition. Explain how in that cover letter, explain how you have filled you have abilities and you have skills coming from this previous profession that you can translate into becoming a librarian and working in the medical field or working in a medical library. Because when we're looking at resumes, I don't just look at the resume, I also look at the cover letter, especially when I look at the resume and I'm like, well, this is kind of bare. Why are they even applying for this position? And then that gets answered in the cover letter. So I cannot emphasize enough from a hiring perspective how important that cover letter is, because that's where you can explain your transition, what you're trying to accomplish, and how you already have the skills and now you want to apply it for this library, in this library.
In addition to cover letters, one thing that I just remembered about my application to UCSF was that they also asked for a research statement, a teaching statement, and a diversity statement. And I don't think most libraries ask for that many statements. And I think they also made it optional, but I did have all of them. And it might be a good idea to just draft these types of statements because they are very common in the academic world.
Good to know. Thank you. Any other questions? looks like we have reached the end of our questions, unless anyone else. Okay. Well, I really appreciate all of your everyone being here, and special thanks to Amanda, Boglarka, and Eileen for coming here and spending their time. I guess that's it for today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Nice talking with you all.
Oh, thank you.
I put my email address in the chat, so if you have any questions, or if you have questions you didn't want to ask in front of the class, or just anything, you know, please feel free to reach out and start networking.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.